My name is Deborah Armintor. I'm an associate professor in the English department here at UNT. And I teach in the LGBT studies program as well. I went to college at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. I was an English major and women's studies minor. And then I went to Rice University in Houston for graduate school, where I got my master's and PhD. And I specialized there in 18th century literature and gender and sexuality studies. And then after getting my PhD, I got the job here. And I love teaching UNT students. I love my job here. I feel very lucky. English 4433, which is Studies in Restoration and 18th Century Literature. It can be on any special topic, and so when I teach it under this special topic, 18th Century Masculinities, or my new course that I've proposed, which is Gender Trouble and Transgender in 18th Century Literature, it's that same course with this special topic. There's some overlaps between these two course ideas. The 18th Century Masculinities course, it falls more under the T in the LGBT studies for the transgender, in that it's an exploration of the many different kinds of masculinities that were constructed in the 18th century, the 1700s, including female masculinities. We spend a lot of time in the beginning of the course on a short story by Henry Fielding called The Female Husband, which is about a woman who becomes a man and feels more comfortable as a man. And so he marries women, is a kind of a serial monogamist, and the story, as I see it, really calls into question this idea that gender is natural, and it shows gender as a performance, and it shows that George Hamilton, who's the protagonist, who used to be Mary Hamilton, is not only as much of a man as the other men in the story, but that he is in many ways more of a man, because his performance of a certain kind of masculinity, and it's a classed masculinity too, he's a doctor, so how this constructed masculinity is no different than any other form of masculinity. It's just that George Hamilton is better at performing it than others, and he gets punished, the so-called female husband, aka George Hamilton, at the end of the story. And so the students, we spend some time discussing, whether this is Fielding, the author, punishing this character for being transgender, or whether this is Fielding showing the inhumanity of man to man in punishing somebody for doing what everybody else is doing. And there's no wrong or right answer to that. It's ambiguous, like many things. So that's an example of the kind of thing that we discuss in this class, and we look at the many different kinds of 18th century masculinities to show that there was no such thing, just as there isn't now, as masculinity. Masculinity never exists in any culture in the singular. There are many different kinds. They change over time, and they're all a matter of performance, as gender is. So the class is really about destabilizing gender by focusing on this very specific literary historical period, which is my area of expertise, the 18th century British literature. But we also read some queer theory and gender theory and trans theory. Why do I teach this course? This is gender was an obsession in this time period, and the destabilization of gender, the denaturalization of gender, was something that many authors in this period were interested in. It's also something that I'm very interested in. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to this period in the first place. Let me see if I don't have a copy of my own book here. But my book that I wrote, called The Little Everyman, is an exploration of 18th century, a particular kind of 18th century masculinity. And its constructedness and uniqueness to the period. Oh, the students, the students, and the ideas that they have, and the questions that they have, and they help me read these texts, which I've read many times on my own, and some more so than others. They help me see them in a new way every time. That's true about any class, any class I teach. It's, the students are the best part. They help keep my brain fresh, and it's really exciting to me to see that they would go out in the world with these complex ways of seeing, ways of reading literature, ways of thinking about literature and culture and history. And will apply it to whatever it is that they go on to do. So that's just extremely exciting to me. What else can they expect? Really good discussions. A lot of close reading. We spend a lot of time dissecting specific passages in texts. I don't like to talk around a text. I like to speak specifically about particular moments. We spend a lot of time looking at title pages. So this, for instance, is the facsimile title page of the Fielding's Female Husband. And we spend a lot of time analyzing the title page, looking at, how, for instance, so here, this is The Female Husband, or The Surprising History of Mrs. Mary, alias Mr. George Hamilton, who was convicted of having married a young woman of Wells and lived with her as her husband, taken from her own mouth since her confinement. It's written as a kind of testimony, as a history. The word history is here, appears really big letters on the page. It's not called, short prose fiction. Now, this is based on a true story, but this is Fielding's fictionalized account of it, and this is very common to the period, it's packaged as a true story, because that's what readers wanted, even when they knew that this was a fiction. Part of the fun of it was to feel like they were holding in their hand a real life, recent historical artifact. So we spend a lot of time looking at these facsimile copies, and I have them read many facsimile copies as well. We don't read everything in facsimile, but I like them to get a sense of what this literature actually looked like back in the day. I hope that they will get out of this class an understanding of that not only that gender is something that's constructed and not natural, but that genders are very specific to certain cultural and historical and geographical moments and places. And so, when we understand that there are so many different genders, it helps us break down the gender binary, this binary view of gender. You have this, male, female. It helps us break that down not only in the 18th century, in terms of 18th century English literature, which is the focus of my course, but in the world that we live in now. And we use lots of contemporary examples. I bring contemporary examples to the class. Students are much better at bringing contemporary examples. A lot of mine are kind of outdated. This is more interesting. I don't know, it might not be that interesting, but this is kind of my story about my college story about why I do what I do. So when I started college wanting to be to take many different languages, and I had some French and Spanish and some Latin, and I just love learning languages, and so I wanted to do that. and I took I took a Shakespeare class my first semester, and I don't even remember why, if it was a requirement or just because I liked Shakespeare, I don't know. But that changed my life because I saw what my Shakespeare professor was doing, and he was a brilliant professor and still is. And I realized that I want his job. I want to do what he's doing. That is the coolest job in the world. And that's when I knew I wanted to be an English professor. I grew up in my mother's a doctor, or she's a psychiatrist. My father is an engineering professor. And so, getting a graduate degree is not unusual in my family, but being in the humanities was. And so anyway, it never really occurred to me this was something that one could do. And I was such a bookworm my whole life. And anyway, I realized this was what I wanted to do, be an English professor.
Cool. Is there anything else you want to say about anything?
Just that I love the LGBT studies program. I'm so glad that we offer it, and it's just such an important program. And any class that a student can take in this program will really help change the way you see the world, and is really fundamental to an understanding of humanness in general. This is not, some marginal conversation about a minority of peoples. It's really ultimately about why about humanity.